Welcome back to Nick and Company. I'm Nick from the Toy Box, and today we are going to be talking about the rise and fall of Webkinz. So, before I get into that, I do want to mention I think we'll have announced it by the time that this episode goes live, but our next event at the Toy Box, which will be the last Sunday of August, I believe that's August 31st or 30th, something like that. We are going to be having a sip and shop. So, anyone 21 plus is welcome to come, and we will have wine present, and you will be allowed to sip and shop with 15% off all school supplies. Back to school shopping does not have to be boring, I guess. So, anyway, today I want to talk about the rise and fall of Webkinz. And for those of you that don't know, Webkinz in the early 2000s, they actually launched in 2005. But in the early 2000s was a massive multiplayer online, a proper MMO. The spin that they had on it was that the only way to play the game online was to acquire a code via purchasing one of their plush in many online stores, retailers, so on and so forth. So it was really revolutionary and kind of like ahead of its time. I mean, talking about it now, it feels like something that could totally be on the shelves today. And yet it basically peaked in 2008. And while it is technically still around today, I mean, it's really a shell of what it once was. So I want to talk about kind of the history of it, why it doesn't really exist or what kind of happened to it, and then where it is today. So in order to properly talk about this, I do think we have to step back and mention the original founders of the company Gons. Now, Gons was a Canadian, I think it's a Canadian company that was actually started by two Holocaust survivors, two brothers. And they started the company in 1950. They were well known for their plush and also their collectibles. Now, while that's not exactly what Webkinz were, they weren't collectibles, they actually ended up having a very collectible nature. So it kind of is this beautiful synthesis of the two things they were most well known for was their plush and their collectibles. So that's 1950. And they ran a very modest company in the grand scheme of things. I mean, I don't think I could name another toy personally, and I'd be impressed if other people were really familiar with the brand outside of Webkinz. So, moving ahead, we get to the 1990s, right? And this is an interesting time. This is an interesting time in toys. It's an interesting time in terms of the internet. The dot-com boom is kind of here, and the bubble is about to burst. And then beyond that, you have toy companies such as Ty and their Beanie Babies kind of taking the world by storm. It was a plush. It was a collectible. People thought they would have real value. I mean, that was a major miss, but I thought that was an interesting thing. Beyond that, I believe in 96, the first Tamagotchi would come out. And they would be relaunched in America with Tamagotchi Connection V1 in 2004. So, not to mention, I believe it was the year 1999, Neopets gets their first launch. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Neopets, they were a similar concept to Webkinz in a sense, but they didn't have that multimedia component. They were purely online. So we're kind of looking at this time period where Ty makes plush super popular. Neopets is kind of convincing people that these online platforms and these online games are worthwhile. And then to go a step further, Tamagotchi is convincing kids to take care of virtual pets. So it's kind of this perfect storm, this perfect like arena for the development of Webkinz. So Webkinz would begin their development in 2003. So right kind of after all of these other toys kind of hit the market and make their impact. It was certainly a child of that era in that sense. And then they would launch in 2005. So for those of you that haven't seen a Webkinz, at the time, and though they've iterated and become very different over the years, they had this like really interesting fur texture that was very unique to a Webkins. They were very soft. They were pretty standard animals. Sometimes they would have slight spins on a familiar animal, and it created this feeling of like needing to collect them because it was the only way to play with that character in the game. I can remember, I want to say they became popular in my school around second or third grade. And I can remember my sister having one and wanting to play the game, So I would bother her until she would let me hunt for gems in the game online. So that was certainly something that was going on at the time. And I think I ultimately ended up caving and asking my parents to get me one just so I could play separately. So Webkins really were massive. Um, and what's kind of interesting about their story that not many people know, because, a lot of this information is pretty widely, you know, known. It's very available on the internet and discussed. But the interesting thing is the piece of this that is kind of a best kept secret. Although there are public documents about this situation, I think most people would assume that much in the way of Beanie Baby or much in the way of a Tamagotchi, that Webkins just kind of faded out and, fell off and, stopped being popular. But the truth is slightly more complicated than that. So, what ended up happening is that Gons at the time actually had other stuffed animals and they had other lines of toys that they wanted people to carry. Yeah, so they had Heritage Collection, Soft Spots, Tubby Tummies, Silly Scoops, and Butterbits Lane. So these were 5 different other lines of toys that they had. Um, and the reason why that's worth mentioning is because even though they would never actually see as much of a widespread appeal as Webkins, these lines were something that Gons wanted to make popular. And so they put retailers in a very sticky situation. Um, so what they actually did was they started telling retailers that in order to carry Webkins, you also had to carry these lines. Um, and as I mentioned, they were never that popular. So you end up asking people, to carry thousands of dollars worth of inventory that they have no business really carrying. And it's going to sit on their shelves and it might sell eventually, but it could take 6 months, it could take a year, and that's burning a hole in people's pockets. I think, obviously, I own a toy store myself, and we are the largest in Westchester County. But compared to some of the big guys, at the time, like there was Toys R Us, KB Toys, things of that nature, compared to the big guys, these small retailers, they can't handle having 2,000 or even just $1,000 worth of inventory that's just burning a hole on the shelf. So this was incredibly manipulative and like predatory behavior. Um, and what this would actually result in was a class action lawsuit with a payout of over $2.5 million. So I'm not sure how that got, chopped up across the retailers. In my opinion, that probably wouldn't be enough to justify it all, but there's certainly something to say for that. And so while, as mentioned before, something like Beanie Babies and the company Ty, Ty's been making toys forever and they're never going to stop. And they've always been, whether they've been the hottest toy on the market or just a quiet staple, they've always been around. And frankly, there's no reason Webkins couldn't have done that. However, they put themselves in a situation where by doing this, they really burned the bridge with these or not manufacturers, with these retailers. And you end up kind of forcing yourself out of the market because by making people buy these things, and mind you, Toys R Us doesn't care. You know what I mean? KB Toys doesn't care. But these smaller retailers, they're the backbone of the toy community. And without them, that's a huge chunk of the market gone. And certainly, many people, when given the opportunity to buy Webkinz along with their other lines, they said no at the time. And then other people did and were burnt by it. So now you've put yourself in a situation where the the entire backbone of the toy community wants nothing to do with you. So to speak on where Webkinz is today, it's actually kind of funny because they've never stopped. But most people would assume that they fell into oblivion and don't exist anymore. But they actually never closed their doors. Gons has continued to create Webkinz. I do believe in 2019 they actually did stop briefly producing the plush toy, but the online game still exists. They've brought back the plush toy since, and even more recently, they've even launched the next generation of Webkinz with this like really creepy online platform. Like you should look it up, go check it out because it's bizarre. It's but I do think it's like a huge missed opportunity and a powerful learning lesson for toy manufacturers, in terms of, when you push people to buy something that's not going to sell in the market, you end up just long term burning that bridge, even if, short term you saw gains. So, yeah, that's really the true rise and fall of Webkinz and sort of how they ended up where they are. And, we'll see where they kind of take it in the future. It would be interesting to see if they could make a comeback because, I mean, thinking back on it, it's remarkable that they came out with something as futuristic as that back in 2005. I mean, the idea of having this virtual pet that also exists in real life, you see this almost get remade time and time again. I mean, even Tamagotchi, they are, essentially, despite still being around, their popularity was more or less usurped by Bitsy, which has been, a massive success for Spin Master in the last 2-3 years. So to say that there's not something kind of taking the place of Webkinz certainly feels strange to me. Like it definitely feels like something that should exist, and I think that people could do it. And, on top of that, when you think of the power of a multimedia thing, you're making money not just from the plush, but also from online. That's like an amazing opportunity. And we're seeing sort of a resurgence in those games. There was a big push to actually bring back Club Penguin, which was, arguably a competitor of Webkinz at the time. So clearly there's a demand for these games. I mean, I'm not going to say it's ever going to be as big as it once was, but clearly there's a demand for these games. And I think having that physical element is genius because it really like creates an emotional connection between the buyer and the character that they're going to play in the online game. So yeah, I would not be surprised to see something like Webkinz sort of make a comeback in the more modern era, and I would love to see it because, frankly, I think given how good technology has gotten, I think it would actually be even more compelling. And I'm trying to think of who might actually do that. I mean, in some respects, that's what you see with Pokemon. Granted, Pokemon doesn't really have the I guess they do have a plush line, but it's not immediately connected. It's not that you have to buy the physical to get it, but I think that's a really cool concept, and I think it rewards people who are actually committed to it. And frankly, I think someone like Pokemon could actually benefit from that quite a lot. I would love to see that actually come into it. I mean, and in some respects, like Pokemon Go is sort of a way to do that. Yeah, I don't know. I think, yeah, the popularity of some of the cuter characters like Eevee and Pikachu. Yeah, I think that could be a really good idea. So, anyway, I could rant and ramble about this for a while, but I know this was a brief episode, but I think that it was a worthwhile discussion because I think it's like it's a very interesting story. The story, it's I mean, it's kind of a classic story. A company flies too close to the sun, they end up burning the bridges of the people that helped them along the way, sort of thing. So it's kind of a classic story in that regard, but it's a good one. And I think we can all learn a little bit from it. So, anyway, as I mentioned earlier, we do have an event later this month, so please come check it out. Sign up online. Follow us on all of our platforms. We have Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, etc. And our YouTube channel, of course. And so, beyond that, I want to thank LMC Media for letting me come in here and rant and ramble. So, thank you guys so much. This has been Nick from the Toy Box, and this has also been Nick and Company. I'll see you in a month.